Hey Adventurers, so today is going to be our top 10 or our kind of our wrap up for the year 2024. I have 10 books on here. Kate has a few more than that, but she'll explain about that when we get to her. I'm going to start with my, well, I just ordered them 1 to 10, and because I ordered them in order of when I read them. So I just went through my year and wrote down the books that were in my top 10. I will mention which one is my favorite book of the year at the end, though. With that being said, nope, that's it. There's nothing else to be said about that. So first book on my top 10 favorites list of the year is The Bloodstones by Tori Tekken. This is the first book in the Legends of the Bruhai series. It's a self-published fantasy. I love this book so much that I listened to it on audiobook. It's narrated by Andrew D. Meredith, who writes and narrates his own books as well. But it's just a phenomenal book, phenomenal story. A little bit of dark fantasy, darker than maybe some people would want, but it's fairly clean. There's some brutality, but in terms of like language and adult content, there's very little. Just overall, basically this book is exactly the type of book that I love, and I don't know how it worked so well for me, but it did.
So the reason I'm doing a couple more than 10 books is because I only read a total of 13 books this year. So I figured I would just add them all up together. Could you pass me the Elemental P? So the first book I read was Elemental P by Mark Dunn. This book was gifted to me, and it was really such a fantastic read. It takes place in a society that feels a little bit like a historical fiction in the way it is. It reminds me a lot of the literary Guernsey and Potato Peel Pie Society. The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society. There we go. It reminds me of that. It's written in a section of letters, grocery lists, that mixed media type of story. Really lovely book, and very thought-provoking in what it's presenting and showing what determination looks like in a society that's eliminating the basic necessities and rights of people.
My next one I don't have a physical copy of because I received an e-arc for this one, although the actual book is now out, and that is The Crimes of Rooker Flynn by A.R. Witham. His debut novel was The Legend of Blackjack, which was one of my favorite books of the year that I read that in, which I believe was 2023. But I don't remember now. But anyways, it was one of my favorite books of the year that I read it in. And so I was super excited to read this next series that he was writing, this next Locke Institute trilogy, which is the Crimes of Rooker Flynn is the first book in that trilogy. And it's set in the same world, follows some characters that you've met in Legend of Blackjack. But in a way it is kind of a sequel series, but it is also, you're not required to have read Legend of Blackjack to go into this series. I would recommend it though. But I absolutely love this book. Witham is just such a great, he does such a great job at writing very fast-paced books that are engaging, that have interesting characters, an interesting world, and that they just, I don't want to say fast-paced, but they're so well-paced that you never get bored while reading them. It's just, all right, let's go on to the next thing. Let's keep going. And one of the things that he did with this series, is that he started including a little bit more horror elements than he did. He had a few in Legend of Blackjack, but he had more in Crimes of Rooker Flynn. And it was just fantastic story, a little bit creepy, a little bit dark, weird, but really fun story as well.
So the next book I read in 2024 was The Lightning Thief by Rick Riordan. I started rereading this after the Disney Plus TV show came out for Percy Jackson, which I believe was quite a while ago now. I was just interested in seeing how it compared to the books, having refreshed the book in my memory. I read this all in ebook, I think, this year because of traveling reasons, but I think that I'm growing a little bit out of the intended audience, so it's becoming a little bit less enjoyable, although I do really like elements of the story still.
The next one that I have is Quaint Creatures, Magical and Mundane. This is a sideways tale, by Andrew D. Meredith. I just mentioned him as an audiobook narrator, and he did narrate this one as well, which, again, very good narration. But this one, it's the first book in a new fantasy universe, if you want to call it that, where I don't know if he plans to write series in this universe or anything, but I know there's going to be a bunch of different stories that are set in this sideways tale, so in this sideways world. And just the way that the story, all right, I should talk about what the story is. So this is a story that follows a giant, I believe, who is veterinarian, a magical veterinarian for magical animals and or quaint creatures. And so you go into his shop, and these people bring him all their pets to deal with their problems and to act as veterinarian for their animals and stuff like that. And through that all, you see this story unfolding that is bigger than just a veterinarian clinic, and is actually part of this whole thing that's going on in the city. And it's just really cool, and it's a really fun story. It's very much cozy fantasy in a lot of ways, which is not, I don't think, my genre, but this book worked really well, and I just had a lot of fun with this one as well.
I also read Slings and Sparrows by Patricia Meredith. I had an e-arc for this one, so I don't have a physical copy of it. It was a really fun story. It was historical fiction. It was a murder mystery, like a cozy murder mystery, set with some really quaint characters in a world that I think she intends to grow on, either to build more on, either as she writes or perhaps has already done that, and I'm just not familiar with all of her books yet. But it was a really, really delightful little mystery.
The next one I listened to, actually, most of these I listened to. Most of these I listened to. I don't think I physically read any of these. But anyways, that's not important. The next one that I listened to that's on my list here is Dandelion Wine by Ray Bradbury. This is, I just released my review of this one in December, so it's a fairly recent review. If you want to go check that out, I would recommend it for sure, because you'll get my full thoughts there, or fuller thoughts. But this is a story about summer and two boys living their lives during summer, and it's just a super nice story. Like, you just have so much fun going and following these kids' stories as they tell about their summer, as they go through the events that happen in this summer. And it's not even so much about two boys as it is about a town, the events that are happening, and how it affects the various people of this town and everything like that. And it's just a very comforting read, but it's also, I mean, there's some darkness to it. There's some creepy, weird things that go on. It's a Bradbury book, of course there's going to be, but it's just really nice. And that's kind of what I think of when I think back on that book. This was a nice book. And I don't know, I really enjoyed it. I'm finding that I really, really like Bradbury, so this was a great book to continue with.
The next book I read in 2024 was called Then Comes a Drifter. This is by C.M. in the last name Banschbach, I think, or Banschbach. Yeah. Anyhow, Then Comes a Drifter. I absolutely love this. I read it on ebook, and it was a fascinating world. It's not science fiction. It could potentially be science fiction. It's set on what appears to be Earth, but with some other elements that have happened to make Earth different from how we know it. It fits so well with the story, extremely vivid. The imagery is fantastic, and it's basically cowboys on motorcycles, but without the cringe that comes with that idea when you think about it. It was so well done. The heroine was really interesting, and the author kept changing what I expected was going to happen. I would say, oh, this trope is coming up, and then it wouldn't be that. And it was just really refreshing and a very enjoyable book.
My next one is Taliesin by Stephen R. Lawhead. This is the first book in the Pendragon cycle. I actually read this entire series this year, although there's a sixth book in the series that's coming out in January, I believe. Yes, anyways, I read this book. I read the first almost half of the book, or 30% of the book or something like that, and I wasn't quite feeling it. Like, I was enjoying it, and it was just starting to get good, but I knew that I wasn't going to have time to continue physically reading it and make my way through it with any speed, and so I switched to the audiobook. The audiobook just helped me to get through it the rest of the way really quickly, and I ended up really, really enjoying this book. The series as a whole, sure, as well, but this book specifically, this one and Merlin is book 2 in the series. I really, really enjoyed a lot of what they were doing, what Lawhead was doing with this series. So this is an Arthurian story. This actually takes place before Arthur is born, and as well as Uther. But this follows the story of Taliesin, who is in this retelling of the Arthurian legend, Taliesin is the father of Merlin, and he's a bard in his own right, and just like a fantastic, the best bard the world has ever known type thing. So it follows two things. It follows the fall of the fall of Atlantis, which is Numenor or Numenor is Atlantis in Tolkien's world, but it follows the fall of Atlantis, as well as the rise of of Albion, essentially this Arthurian kingdom, and specifically this character Taliesin in this series, and so, or in this book. And I really connected with that character and with some of the events that were going on in this series, in this book, and I really enjoyed it. Plus, it was great to be back in Arthurian literature.
I also read a Western novella, Drew, by Sidney Sterner. This is a self-published. Is it self-published?
Yes.
It is a self-published book by a debut author. It was a really interesting little story and kind of fun to see. I really was in a Western mood, so it was really fun and the perfect book to satisfy my Western craving.
I believe this book has actually been pulled down at this point and is being like re-edited and republished or something like that. From what I understand, I would need to research it a little bit more again. So my next book then is The Rising Tide by Jeff Shara. This is a as it says, a novel of World War II. So this is a World War II novel, and it's about like a tank gunner, I believe is who it is, as well as like a paratrooper, and you follow some of the generals that were in World War II and doing stuff, and just it's a very big picture book, while at the same time you are able to connect to it because you're following specific characters in this big picture. And the way that Shara was able to write this story actually worked really well for me, and I really, really enjoyed it. I definitely want to continue. This is the first book in a trilogy, in a I don't know, World War II trilogy. I can't remember what the actual trilogy is called. But I want to continue. It's not something that I'm going to continue immediately because I've got so much else to read, but I did really, really enjoy this, and I want to continue for sure.
I also read Isaiah's Daughter by Misu Andrews. I absolutely love this story. It's following the biblical person Isaiah, and who is considered his daughter. Crazy, I know based on the title. But what I really loved is it brings characters in the Bible to life in a very real way by... Although the surrounding characters are often fictional or without historical basis, it brings those historical characters to life, and that's really neat.
My next one then is The Illustrated Man, also by Ray Bradbury. So this is the second or third Bradbury that I read this year. I don't know, that doesn't matter. Anyways, The Illustrated Man is about a character, well, it's actually a collection of short stories with the framing narrative being around this Illustrated Man character. And there is one short story at the end of the collection that is titled The Illustrated Man. And there's also a character in Something Wicked This Way Comes called The Illustrated Man. And all these characters, I'm not sure if they are the same character or not. Originally picked up Illustrated Man expecting it to be that same character from Something Wicked This Way Comes. And again, I'm not sure that it is, but I'm also not sure that it isn't. Either way, though, the story is about future. It's about Earth. It's about humans going to Mars and like colonizing Mars and the stuff that's going on with that. And so it's very much a futuristic sci-fi, but also like the horrors that come with that, the failings of humanity and everything like that. And because it's Ray Bradbury, he does it in a way that's extremely atmospheric and extremely in like a hauntingly beautiful way that just it makes you enjoy the book just for the words that you're reading, but then when you actually read the stories as well, there's a level of depth to the stories, and the themes really shine out in these stories, and it's just a very good collection of short stories. And again, Bradbury is just rapidly becoming one of my favorite authors.
I also read The Cat of Bubastes by G.A. Hinty this year, or I listened to the audiobook. Growing up, my mom and a couple of my older siblings really loved a couple of the G.A. Hinty audiobooks, and I've read a few of his books over the years, but this is one I didn't know the story of, so I was really excited to try it, and it was interesting. It's very G.A. Hinty in the intense amount of historical information that he includes in all of his books, and the way that affects the story, but he also continues to have strong heroes and heroines that are really, really cool to see, even with all of the history that he's also giving to the reader.
So then my next book is The Trial of Rooker Flynn, which is the sequel to The Crimes of Rooker Flynn, so book 2 in the series. Again, I received an e-arc for this one. And so I basically, all the same things that I said about Crimes of Rooker Flynn carry over to this Trial of Rooker Flynn, and it's not a happy series, but it's very fun, and with him is just really becoming a really good writer in these. I mean, he's published 2 books with this Trial of Rooker Flynn coming out in January, I believe, and so he's not a super experienced writer in that in that way, but he's just becoming very, very good, and overall just the quality of his stories is very, very high, and so I'm just enjoying them a lot.
So I also read a book called The Thief of Corinth. This is by Tessa Asfar, I believe. Afshar, by Tessa Afshar. And this was one I found at the library. I was very interested. It's set in biblical, what would be New Testament biblical time frame, so I was interested once again to see how it was played out. I had a lot of mixed feelings about it. It was written in a very modern style, and I wasn't able to immerse myself in the story in the sense of, oh, let me envision the world around me as being this time frame. It wasn't that the author lacked details or anything like that. It was just, I think it was just the voice was a little bit too modern to fit the story, in my personal opinion. So I liked elements of it, but overall I was a little conflicted in, okay, what am I reading as I went through it?
My next one is Dread Knight by Andrew D. Meredith. So this is the 4th book in his Collation saga. So this is actually the end of arc 1. He's going to do 2 arcs of 4 books each for the Collation saga, and then go around and do more stories in this world. But this is the 4th book in this kind of first arc, so it's kind of a closing up, a wrapping up of this series to some degree. It's very satisfying. There's a very satisfying ending to this, to the point where I'm like, okay, I'm not dying to read the next book. I can wait until he has it out, especially since I have so many other books to read. And that's a great place for you to be with an ending of a series, or a closing of a series, I guess, is to just have it be satisfying enough that you want to continue, but you're not ending on a cliffhanger type thing. And I did this was very, very good book, lots of great storytelling, lots of great things from the other books in the series. I can't really talk about a whole lot because it is book 4 in a series, but yes, Dread Knight by Andrew D. Meredith.
So the next book I read in 2024 was The Lost Girl of Astor Street by Stephanie Morrill. I loved this. This is set in the 1920s. It's like a detective style mystery. It gets a little intense at times with the perfect level without being too graphic, so it'd be very good for a younger audience as well, I think. It was just such a fantastic story. I loved it from cover to cover, and I just sped through it. It was really, really great historical fiction.
So my last of my top 10 for the year is The Wizard from the duology The Wizard Knight by Jane Wolfe. So this is the second part of the duology. And so I physically read the first part, and I listened to the audiobook for the second part, because that's how I ended up having time to do it. But I read this series with Liam from Liam's Lyceum, Shannon from Shannon's Shelf, and Britton from Samoki Dude. And so we were kind of doing like a buddy read on this series, and it was really good in that way, because Jane Wolfe is notoriously complex, I'll say, and it was really good to have some people to discuss things with and to break things down a little bit more and to understand it. But the thing that made The Wizard be more enjoyable to me than The Knight was that it started incorporating more of the Arthurian legend to some degree, and it's not specifically King Arthur and his knights, but there are some things that kind of are parallels or similarities to that story, or names that are just tweaked just slightly, but you know that this is who it's implying and stuff like that. And so I really appreciated that side of the storytelling of this book. And I do in general believe that the story as a whole of the Knight, or of the Wizard, was a little bit better than that of the Knight.
So this is a little bit of a quick mention, but I read the Boxcar Children mystery, the very first one. So growing up, this was my favorite mystery series, and I read them, the first 19, over and over again. But what I didn't realize, what I found out this year, is that the original book written by Gertrude Chandler Warner in 1924 isn't what most people are reading. They're reading one that was written as an easy reader for children in school, that was done in 1942. So I found the original 1924 copy edition and was able to read that online actually. So that was kind of fun seeing the different style and the actual origins of the original Boxcar Children.
Hey, so I realized that I totally forgot to say what book is my favorite book of 2024. And so that is obviously going to be The Bloodstones by Tori Tech. And this is one that I read at the beginning of the year, January or February or something like that. And it just stayed there the entire time in as my favorite book of the year. From that time that I read it, I was like, well, I'll probably read another book that I like more than it. I didn't. This book just worked perfect for me. So that's my favorite book of the year.
So I also read How to Stop Time, and I've forgotten the author. It's the same author who wrote Humans and The Midnight Library Math.
Matt Haig?
Yes, Matt Haig, thank you. How to Stop Time, that was a little bit interesting. I really like Matt Haig's writing style. It's easy to follow, and he writes in a tone and a language that's very rapid. So it feels like you're reading quickly. The pace is always moving, which makes it enjoyable, especially for someone like me who has a short attention span. So I like his books in general, and I wanted to like this one, but I think his others have struck better with me because this one was spread through so much time and history, and while it took a really long time to get to the point of what we were doing, and the point of the story, the whole time we knew where we were heading, we knew what the goal was, but we weren't able to attain that or get closer to it for a very long time. And I love stories that follow people's lives. That's been great. I love those books like Zorro, things that just will break down a character's life. But this is a character who lived like 400 years, so it was a little bit longer than normal. While it was done in a good pacing for that, it just didn't, I didn't love it as much as I liked Human, for example, but it was an interesting read if you like historical fiction. I also had read The Blueberry Pickers by Amanda Peters. This was an audiobook. It was an interesting story, and it made me cry because it was about a little girl who was abducted from her family, and we got to watch the family that she was taken from, how it affected them and what their lives became like, and then it also watching the family that took her. So seeing both sides of those things and the connections that happened over time was really interesting. Yeah, it was an interesting book. The last book I read in 2024 was In the Heart of the Sea by Nathaniel Philbrick. I will say this was fascinating, extremely fascinating. I will say I didn't finish the entire appendix of the book, which the author has clearly invested an enormous amount of time into the book, and that's very clear in the appendix, but it wasn't what I was reading the book for, so I only got about halfway through that. It's about 2/3 of the length of the book story. It was a nonfiction. In the Heart of the Sea is a nonfiction.
But that's the story that Moby Dick was based on, right?
Yeah.
Right, there you go. That's what they
But
did.
it was fiction. It was not fiction.
Moby Dick is a fictional story based on this true story of In the Heart of the Sea. Yes. Before we end this, though, we wanted to quickly go over the books that we read.
Just in case
a little bit of the stats. Right. So I read a total of 41, or kind of 42, and I'll mention that 42nd one in a second here. But I read a total of 41 books. I DNF'd 2, so that would actually bump my total to 43 had I read that, or had I finished those, and both of them were at like 70% when I DNF'd them, so it was close. So of those 41 books, 6.5 of them were physical, 5 of them were ebooks, and then 29.5 were audiobooks. So that half physical and half audiobook would have been Taliesin by Stephen R. Lohan. As far as the 42nd one goes, that would have been I read through the entirety of the Bible, as I mentioned, in, I don't know, September wrap-up or October wrap-up or something like that. I read through the entirety of the Bible in 2 months, so I'm counting that as a book read because I read the entirety of it. And so that would be that 42nd official one.
So I read a total of 13 books in 2024. It came drastically under my estimated and goals of the year. I expected to read about 100, and in August I reassessed my goals and set it for 12. So I read a total of 5.5 physical books, half of it being How to Stop Time, but that was half physical, half audiobook. I listened to 3.5 audiobooks and then 4 ebooks total.
And if you're wondering why our numbers are so low, it is because we are out of the country for 6 months. That's the reason why our numbers are a bit lower than they have been in the past years. But anyways, that has been our wrap up for the month or for the year of 2025. Or
24.
That has been our wrap up for the year of 2024. Thank you guys for watching an Erudite Adventure and sticking with us through this year. We will continue on into 2025 with more things, I'm sure, and hopefully you guys find more stuff that you want to watch from us. So thank you guys for watching an Erudite Adventure. We will see you guys again soon. Stay well.